All right, what is up, everybody? Today it is time for another podcast with another AIM phenom. Viscose is here with me, someone who has made incredible content and is an incredible aimer. And so I'm really happy to speak with you, Viscose, because your content it kind of blew me away when I first saw it, sort of the detail
Thank
and not just
you.
the detail, but also the skill behind that as well. So yeah, thanks for taking the time to chat with me.
No, and thank you for inviting me. I know this has been been in the plans for a while. I'm glad we finally, both were free at the same time. I guess time zones have been a nightmare, but yeah, I've been really looking forward to this.
Yes, it's awesome. Matty was the one that put me onto you. He's like, I asked him, okay, who else in the Amy community should I talk to after I'd done a podcast with him? And he's like, Viscose, you must talk to Viscose. So here we are. Yeah, as you said, it took a while to get here, but I'm glad that we can finally discuss some aiming topics, and who knows what else we'll get into. But with aim training, I feel like there's so many different difficult questions with aim training when people go there to just to get better aim, and they want to transfer that then into the game of choice. And okay, well, that in of itself is a big question mark. That's the number one turn off, I think, for many people. They just don't see
Hmm.
the practical. Okay, this is an opportunity cost problem. I'm going to spend all this time in this game that I don't play. Okay, that doesn't seem worth it to me. Which I can make that makes sense to me, and like most people don't even understand like effective learning or how to self coach or self teach. It
Mm.
feels like that's kind of the next big hurdle. And without being in a community like Voltaic or RA, or watching, and just consuming loads of content to kind of learn how to coach yourself or be kind of passively coached by the community in a way, you're kind of stuck, to be honest, in finding the value of aim training without feeling like you're wasting a lot of time doing it. And so, how do you feel about like these conundrums?
Well, I guess firstly, if you want to improve the most efficiently and Valorant, it's going to be a lot of vote reviewing, a lot of watching games, watching videos. I don't know why people kind of expect it to be different with aim training. I don't know why people think you can just hop in, play some static, play some grid shot, not really think about it and just be the best. It doesn't really make sense to me that that has become a bit of a common consensus, at least among the more broad FPS community. Um, for me, it was kind of a given that I would have to really think about this and dedicate myself to getting better and learning more. Um, yeah, that's a big thing for me. Like you'll still get better aim training without being super cognizant of what you're doing and whatnot. But just like in a game, it won't be as quick, it won't be as effective. But the other thing I think people miss in terms of time balance, going back to that for a sec, is that you don't need to spend a crazy amount of time actually aim training. You can, let's say I'm a Valorant player and I want to improve at Valorant and improve my aim. When I'm watching a VOD and taking note of like positional mistakes, strategic mistakes, that kind of stuff, I can also keep an eye out for, aim mistakes. And then even just 20 minutes in an aim trainer, playing a scenario that will address that mistake is I don't know, really impactful. When you think about how long you spend aiming in a game of Valorant versus 20 minutes of aim training, that's probably I don't know, 6 games at least. It's super efficient and you don't need to spend hours every single day just grinding out Kovacs to, see the improvement from aim training, in my opinion. Especially if you link it with VOD reviews, like I said.
Yeah, I think that's a great call out. I think it is. I think you're totally right. It should be looked at in the same kind of way. And for me, something that comes up with what you're saying is also the difference of the intentional training. Because
Mhm.
you're essentially aware of what you're doing. I'm seeing this particular weakness in the game or whatever, and I want to isolate this. I'm figuring out what exactly I can do to isolate that particular skill. It's this type of skill. Here are some scenarios that help me with that. And then you're actually spending that time consciously trying to optimize how you use your mouse control to execute that skill. And in doing that and being aware of that and being intentional about that, that's basically where learning takes place ultimately. And obviously, I think within that, I would say one of the struggles for me, or at least if I'm just going to draw from my own experience here, is that
Mhm.
I'll spend time doing that, and then eventually, as I start to play, it might get to a point where I'm noticing that everything that I was intentionally doing in the aim trainer, I might sort of go back to some old habits when I'm playing, back in my regular game because I'm 3 hours deep or something in a session.
Yeah.
And that's where I feel like, because it definitely helps. Like if I'm consistently aim training, it definitely raises my level, but I can also see my level go down again sometimes too.
I think the biggest thing for that is just like how consistent you are with your training, you know? Like I said, it doesn't have to be like an hour every day even, but even just a little every day will kind of keep it more fresh, more habitual. And yeah, I agree fully. My level goes down pretty dramatically if I'm not like actively playing aim trainers. Even now after like I've been playing them like 5 years at this point, I still yeah, benefit from actively playing, which I think is really cool.
Yeah, it's really interesting how all of this works because I remember talking to Metadoc ages ago. I actually referenced this one podcast I did with him quite a lot because he dropped a lot of like really good information. And one of the many things that he was talking about, which was something when I was like last like actively competing at a high level that I was doing, was you find your optimal play time and you basically figure out how many hours of the day can you play until you start to notice like symptoms that indicate that you're fatigued. And because my sense there was that, okay, as soon as I'm fatigued, I'm going to be making mistakes, and I want to practice as consistently high level as I can so that I can be a very consistent player, because that's really how you become consistent, is by practicing
Hmm.
consistently. And so I noticed that I got way more gains by actually playing less hours than I used to. By doing, because I wasn't aim training per se, but I actually used like this. I don't even remember what it was called. It's like a really shitty aim, because it's like 2017, and it's like this really shitty aim trainer that had like some. It's like some like it was like a Dust 2. Like it was one of the maps was like you're on Dust 2, and there are just these orbs that kind of like pop up in certain spots. And even though I was like
I think
practicing
I
very
know the
passive,
one you mean.
do you actually?
I think I know that. Yeah. I don't know what it's called, but I think I've played it.
Yeah, I would just practice the flick shotting on that, and that'd be like I created my own like routine, and that's how I would always start my day. And anyway, so I noticed that all of these smaller things I was doing, they were less time investments, but I was putting a lot more energy into them. And then on top of that, I
Hmm.
was really taking care of my sleep and my exercise, and I was very consistent with a lot that was around the training. And I think that's also something that people overlook in terms of consistency, is what they're doing around the training. And sometimes, because I think it can feel like the in-training is not helping when maybe you might actually be doing other things that could harm the efficacy of that training, and you're essentially making it less effective. So something else I think for people to consider. Um, how did you get into aim training, by the way? Like, what was the moment where you like really got into it?
It was Counter Strike. I want to touch on like that physical
Oh yeah, yeah.
element of it because I've been talking to Clover, if you're familiar with him.
Mhm.
He has recently been on a bit of like a, health craze. He's been exercising heaps, eating really well. He says he like actually feels really, really like noticeably quicker when playing aim trainers now. Like in terms of reaction time and reaction speed. He says it's really, really significant, which I think is cool because he was already really quick. Um, so that's my little anecdote from a friend on that one. I think it absolutely does play a pretty massive role.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of stuff here, I think, that is overlooked. There are even things such as like, again, this is, I think, something that Metadog talked about, but when you exercise, even if you're doing like 15, 20 minutes of exercise, it increases something in your brain called the brain-derived neurotropic factor, and that
Hmm.
essentially makes your brain much better at learning. And so, if you've just done a session of learning, it's much more likely to take impact or have a higher degree of impact if you add something like that in there. Or similarly, meditation also seems to have, or like a non-sleep deep rest. It also seems to have like a positive impact there as well. So yeah, there's a lot of like little tricks, and I totally believe that Clever would have a better performance too, because I think the ability to focus definitely comes down to the quality of the energy that you have. And I know that, our energy levels that we're walking around with can be optimized in so many different ways. Sleep, nutrition, exercise all have great contributions. And if you eat a really heavy meal, you're not gonna be as cognitively alert. For example, there's lots of things that impact alertness. So I totally believe that, and And I just tweeted today actually, something along the lines of any player that's not sort of tracking their sleep, any pro player that's not tracking their sleep is like losing an edge because sleep is so important to maxing your performance. So all the edges, so many edges to get.
Honestly, can't comment on the sleep thing. Mine is always, always destroyed. There's nothing I can do about it. I've given up. So,
Honestly, that gives
um,
me a lot of hope because your aim is still absolutely cracked. So
thank you.
well,
It makes sense to me that it would help, but yeah, I mean, I don't think it's like a necessity. At least I hope not. So,
well, you're talking about sort of that
um,
alertness, and maybe I can just actually shift it very quickly to. I know you're making
mm,
a movement reading video. Is that something you want to
mhm.
talk to at all, or do you want to like leave it as a total surprise? Because I know you have that coming out at some point in the future.
I'll definitely leave most of it for the video, but I think as a general point I want to get across in the video that I had two lines about it. I had to cut one, so I want to reemphasize it here. Is that I think people should be thinking of like prediction and reaction as two features on the opposite end of a spectrum, right? And then reading kind of encompasses that whole middle portion, if that makes sense. So, like, reading can aid your predictions. You can have informed predictions based on, like, physical space or like where an enemy is going to be going. And you can have informed reactions. So, like, instead of reacting to a target changing directions physically, you can react to an animation tell, or acceleration is another one. You can pick up on deceleration and acceleration. There are so many nuances to reading that kind of play into prediction and reaction. And I feel like you shouldn't really, you want to try and avoid ever purely predicting or reacting. You don't really need to. There's typically something else you can kind of lean into to inform either of them. And that's kind of the dichotomy I want to establish with this video. That's my main point, I guess.
And if you guys want to see that video, definitely check the description for Viscose's YouTube channel so that you don't miss that. Because I got to take a peek at some of the video and your script as well, and it's actually interesting because I just looking at the information that you provided there, although it's stuff that I'm familiar with, the way that you packaged it sort of helped me to apply it in a way that actually helped my performance a bit in some of those scenarios. So
Thank
it's
you.
really powerful, the content that you're making, and yeah, so I'm really looking forward to seeing the full version of that one.
Yeah, I think a lot of the info will be like stuff that people will have intuited over time. I know that's been my experience talking to like pros about it. Like they do it instinctually, but have never thought about it, and actively thinking about it can give them a new edge when it comes to training it, or yeah, getting a better idea of how they do things and why they do things how they do. And for the script, actually, yesterday I rewrote like the whole second half of it because I wasn't happy with it. So
Oh, nice.
I think it's going to turn out much better than the one you read, actually.
Oh, sick.
Yeah, it's a lot more compact, a lot more dense now, I suppose, and ties into itself better, I guess.
Oof, I can't wait, can't wait. And I think does lead me into the next question, that I think anyone that's watched your gameplay footage, I think all of the skills that you show, all the aiming skills, I think what jumps out the most is switching, which is kind of funny in a way because switching, obviously, you have to be very good at both. Your clicking, your flicking, and also your tracking. So it's kind of as it's a combination of those two skills. And I guess in that sense, switching is almost like the one of the most advanced categories because you kind of have to have a good mastery of all of the things within both tracking and also flicking. So that's something that you really have amazing clips on. So when with switching,
Thank you.
was this always like a great category for you, or how did that develop for you um in terms of yeah your skill with it?
Yeah, it used to be probably my specialty. It was like kind of the one thing I was good at, actually, which is funny because yeah, it is a combination of the other two. But I feel like you can get um, pretty far in switching by just brute forcing speed. And then recently, when I went back and retrained my clicking and my tracking, I found myself doing a lot better in game, even though my actual like target switching scores might not be as good or might not be as like fast. Um, so yeah, those other skills definitely play a pretty massive role there. And I think something important about target switching that a lot of people actually miss is that it is quite different in games to in aim trainers. usually I think the translation, like for tracking, is really direct, right? Like you track in the same way using the same tells that you do, besides animation tells, in like a game to an aim trainer. But in target switching, I feel like the emphasized skills are very, very different. You know, like to name a couple, directional awareness is a big one. Like 360, being aware of the space around you and how far you need to move your mouse to, I don't know, move like 180 degrees isn't really something that's isolated in an aim trainer. Doing it accurately isn't something you ever really have to do. As well as like flicking based on audio cues is another really big one. And that doesn't really happen in Kovacs. Like 360 awareness audio cues, not really stressed in any benchmark. And I think part of the reason, one sec. I think part of the reason why I think I do better than, like, I don't know, my switching scores would suggest, I suppose, in games when it comes to the skill is like, yeah, being aware of like audio cues, how to flick to them based on like directionally knowing where they are. And I actually kind of did train that in aim trainers, which most people don't. I played like 360 scenarios with the spawn sounds on, so I could like hear where the target spawned and then like flick to that spawn. And it was an odd way of training. The scenarios that I'll like build for it aren't very good. But I think it actually really helped. And I think, yeah, is a super important part of like target switching in game that is kind of undertrained right now.
That's really interesting that you say that actually, because that is yeah, you're right. That's definitely a hole in at least from what I've seen with aim training, but it is something that when I play like death matches in Counter Strike historically, that's
Hmm.
something that I'll often do is not even with sound cues, but I'll make sure that where like I'm whatever spot I'm in on a map that I can make a really sudden like a massive positional like flick where as if someone had suddenly started shooting me and they're like 180 degrees behind me, can I flick to the spot with like perfect crosshair
Yes,
placement
actually.
relative to where I am right now? That would be like the most likely spot that person would be shooting me from. And like just to like get reps on like practicing that big flick and then being able to then have that kind of awareness. And it's kind of weird in a way because when at least when I do that in game, I'm trying to visualize to like understand how to flick and get the mouse to stop where I want it to. Obviously, you can't see the spot that you're flicking to and where you want to stop. So you have to like visualize, or at least this is how I do. I try to like visualize what that spot on the map looks like. And that's kind of I don't know. It's kind of weird. Do you do that?
That's
I don't
cool.
know.
I think I've internalized a lot of it for like how far I'll have to move my mouse for a given angle. I wouldn't call it muscle memory because I can do it on any sense really, but yeah, that internalization of like how you would extrapolate on-screen movements to off-screen movements. It's actually cool you mentioned Counter-Strike because I think it's a part of why this is a specialty of mine. And yeah, it is like flicking to angles off screen, but also isolating yourself from angles, like if you're target switching to someone and you can shoot one target, flick to another, but while you're shooting the first one, you can like put yourself behind a box or something and then like start to strafe out from behind that box so that you're exposed to the second target only as you flick to them. Yeah, that's a really important skill. Again, not trainable in aim trainers, but yeah, I think Counter-Strike developed both of them really well for me.
I love how you described this all that sort of like tactical in-fight decision making when you're isolating.
Mhm.
Because I love those spots where you're like, okay, in my head, I know the timings. I got 3 opponents, and I know all of the timings of the peaks. If I peak this guy, I'm gonna take a guess as to how I think the other person will react based on their position, and I'm gonna try to like
Mhm.
either swing into an off angle at a timing that they don't expect, and then also at the same time cut myself off from the other 2 angles, and then like playing with all these options in like these really short amounts of time. That's the stuff that like I think with FPS games, now that I'm thinking about Counter-Strike, that's like one of those things that feels the most exciting, the most fun. It's such a great moment of skill expression. And it reminds me of when you
Yeah.
see like I don't know, like a footballer who's able to kind of like duke out like the defenders, with like really good footwork and stuff like that. It feels like a similar kind of thing to that. It's really cool. Yeah, it just caught me in like appreciating that because Because sometimes I wonder, like, because I'm like 36 now, I'm like, fuck, I'm still playing these video games, you know, like, and you know, people play golf forever, you know, people play all sorts of sports forever, and yeah, I don't think I'm too old for how awesome this is, because it is really awesome. So I just wanted to appreciate that for a second as you mentioned that in-fight
Um,
scenario.
I have one more note about target switching. After that, would you like to touch on like, I don't know, age in FPS in aiming in esports? Because I know it's like a fairly, I don't know, common concern for people who are, you know, maybe getting into the late 20s, early 30s. Like, am I too old for this? And I think I do have stuff to say about it. So is that something you'd like to talk about or?
Yeah, totally happy to go there. Yeah, for sure. Happy. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
Just want to say first about target switching. I don't think like developing the skill in aim trainers is like useless. I think it's really helpful. Um, I just think it is the foundation that you build upon with like, you know, map knowledge, flicking to angles, angle isolation, audio awareness. Like none of it matters if you can't hit the flick. So yeah, Kovacs helps develop the flick, but everything else around it also matters a lot for actually getting those like target switching moments in games. And that's all I have to end that kind of topic.
I might add on one thing here for target switching too, because I know when a lot of people are playing target switching tasks, or they're thinking about improving them, and this has been at least my sense with aim training in general, is that the reason why consuming the content might be one of the more difficult parts, but the necessary parts, is so that you get this ability to categorize and break down the skills, and then once you've done that, you have a sense as to, oh, which dials and levers do I need to kind of like pull and rotate to kind of fix my movement here so that it's more efficient. And so like when I'm
Mm,
doing target switching, I'm usually thinking about like, oh, what is my tension like for the flick? But what is my tension like also when I've come off the flick and I'm now doing the tracking? Or what is my pathing like between the target A to target B? Am I under flicking, or am I over flicking? Just like that's something that now when I'm training now with as someone that has a lot more knowledge, I found that stuff
mhm.
has been very helpful for me to actually make the improvements. But because before I was just trying to shoot the targets. Um,
Yeah.
and so I wanted to throw that out there as something that people could practically, like, this is like the kind of information that you could look for, that could probably help you as well if you're really confused about target switching. And then I wanted to ask you one extra thing about this actually before we leave this topic,
Mhm.
which is a long time ago, when I first started aim training, someone had mentioned, oh yeah, you just need to make sure that, yeah, you're looking at the target that you're shooting, but you also sort of have a secondary target focus in your mind as well, so you know where you're flicking to, um, whilst you're still killing the first target. To me, that's like the way to get really fast. Is that how would you describe that? Is that a good description of how you can kind of increase your speed?
Yeah, I think so. Obviously, it's variable, and where I focus is something that is a bit hard to isolate in real time. But I know for absolute certain there have been times where I am like shooting at one target and not looking at them like actively, which I don't usually recommend. But I was looking for like a second target or watching an angle and tracking the person with my peripheral instead of my like primary vision. So yeah, absolutely. You should be like keeping an eye out for potential targets when you're in a situation where it makes sense to. Generally, I wouldn't advise like not looking at them like I have done before, but yeah, you definitely do need to be using your peripheral to locate targets or watch angles where targets could appear from, um, and be reactive like based on that information.
All right, very good tips. I think that should be pretty helpful. I'm actually really trying to improve my switching right now too, so I
Oh,
love to hear
awesome.
it. With that said, I know that we were mentioning the topic of age previously, and I know you have some thoughts on that one as well. So happy to dive into that topic, because I think it is becoming more of an interesting discussion, and we're finally getting actual pro players that are actually entering the age range where people will be like, "No, your reaction times will be too slow," which is like always the like argument somehow, and it's like, okay, you
Oh,
probably don't
that's so
understand how
dumb.
this actually works. But yeah, so what are your thoughts about it?
So, disclaimer, I am not like anywhere near those age ranges. I'm 19. I have no experience with being in my late 20s, but I know people who are in their mid to late 20s who are like really, really quick. I I know Pinguify is, I think, 26 and has a reaction time of 130 on Human Bench, which is faster than I was at like 15. I'm faster than I was at 15, actually. Reaction time is like a trainable skill, you know? You're not like born with a reaction time and you're stuck with it forever. Like, you can improve at this through practice and, yeah, health stuff as well will improve it. I don't think people will just be slow because they're like 30 or 35. And yeah, I really don't think it matters as much as people think it does for mechanics. You can still be very sharp, very alert, very quick at, 30, 35,
Yeah, I
probably
totally
older.
agree. Yeah, I think the reaction time thing is interesting. There's I mean, I know that you know about this because I told you, but I've got some stuff I'm working on at the moment, which will go into more depth about the ability to like specifically train reaction time. And but I think
Hmm.
it is a really interesting topic to speak of because there is definitely some physiological differences when you're getting older that I think would definitely make you a little bit worse. But I think it's also mitigated. I think if you were someone that started out playing and kind of getting good at video games from a fairly young age or just at least your teens, and then you get to into your 30s or whatever. Yes, when you get into your 30s, you have much less neuroplasticity, so there is definitely your learning is going to be a little bit worse in some regards. But again, as we talked about previously, I think there's a lot of other things you can do that actually
Hmm.
mitigate that. But I think this in general is mitigated by the fact that you already have a lot of experience playing, and you have much more experience of what works in terms of training, and also just having more experience with dealing with pressure or dealing with things that you would normally be faced with in competition. So then I think it kind of balances out, to be honest. That's really my sense of it. I do think you will get these phenoms though, like people like Donk that kind of, come out of nowhere and have like both incredible talent and the power of kind of youth behind them. But I do think though, if someone was really good at a certain age, I personally don't think that age is going to be the restriction. I think it's more going to be about other factors as well. So I'm on the same page with
I
you
think
here.
it's like with people like Donk and with people like, tending to get worse as they get older into their late 20s, I feel like it's a correlation more than causation thing because, I know personally when I was 15, I could play like 2 hours, 3 hours of aim training a day. No big deal. If I do that now, like, what am I doing? There's no productivity here. I'm not getting anything done. So, and I do this for a living. This is my job, technically. So I can only imagine what it's like for people who, have to do a 9 to 5, go into the office. They just don't have the time to commit that someone like Donk does, who has played like on average 6 hours a day of Counter Strike since he started playing or something. It's ridiculous. I don't understand. um, and I really do think that is the biggest like factor when you look at people's performance and how it drops off with age. Like, they have obligations, they have a family, um, and they just can't commit the time. But if someone did commit the time, I don't see what would be, limiting them. I don't think reaction time matters that much when it comes to performance. Um, and I don't think you necessarily will get like, unfathomably slow as you, get into your mid 30s or anything.
Yeah, and I think it kind of goes back a little bit to some of the things you were saying about movement reading to an extent as well,
Hmm.
because a lot of the speed, because I think this is the thing. Like when people talk about the reaction time, I'm like, oh, I definitely know that you haven't played like at a high level at all, or even like a decent level, like casually, because even casual players will experience those moments when they like reacted within like 30 milliseconds, and they are consciously unable to process what they just did.
Hmm.
Like those kills you get where you're like, "Whoa, what the hell? I didn't even consciously register that person was on the screen and he's already dead and I did it. Am I cheating?" Everyone's had those moments. You've had those moments, you know that there's something else going on here. It's not just like raw
Yeah,
reaction time. Um,
I agree.
it is
My
interesting.
my end paragraph with the movement reading video is about how, like, if this like reaction time number is something you've felt will limit you or you've felt kind of constricted by, like, there's no point practicing, I'm so slow. This is how you mitigate it, It doesn't matter if like you're slow to react, if you're really, really good at picking up on these tells and reading movement, and it will, yeah, work around all of that for you. I really don't think reaction time is that important at all, really. And yeah, it is trainable. So that's something to keep in mind too.
Yeah, people are hating right now because we're just taking away all the excuses. Um,
No, but it's good because it means there's nothing holding you back, you know?
true, true. But if you're a pessimist, you really hate to see it. Um, So, but no, I totally agree with you, and I think it is interesting because I do think that there are definitely players that I think have some perhaps like I mean it's like like Usain Bolt or Michael Phelps. These people their bodies were crafted for the sports that they play. They have so much sort of genetic luck on top of what they're already doing, and I do think Simple. I referenced this I've referenced this a few times in the past where there was this interview from Simple years ago now, maybe in like, I don't know, 2019 or something like that. And he was just being asked like, how are you so good? This was more or less a question. And he's like, well, I just I play a lot and every time I'm playing at 100%. And it sounds like kind of like almost a throwaway comment, but I think there is a lot more to be read into there, which is at least from my reading of it is that Simple, he plays a lot, but he has the capacity and the endurance, the mental endurance to put out an enormous level of focus and energy behind his long hours, more so than others. So he's going to get a higher return of skill from the hours he puts in because he has such a high degree of inherent focus and mental endurance that he can apply to his practice hours. And then he can apply more hours than you probably could anyway. So he's basically playing like 1.5x the amount of time that you're playing. Even though he's clocking in the same hours, but that might be one way to like think about it. And so
I do think it's like a developed thing though. I don't think he was just like born like that, you know? What factors it was, like that'll of course vary, but I do think it's something you can develop through, yeah, training
I
and
disagree.
um
Yeah.
and discipline.
Yeah, it's I think you're totally right on the discipline front, especially as well. Because if you think about I think if you think about all of the ways you can kind of be lazy when you're playing, in terms of kind of either shutting your brain off or starting to play with music on or starting to chase kills or not really being strict to doing the things that it takes to be good, because it's not always fun.
Hmm.
Like it's the weird thing I think with gaming is that gaming presses the dopamine buttons much more than playing a traditional sport. The games are designed to make you want to keep playing and to hit a headshot, and like these things feel good. So you've got all of these like incentives that are actually kind of working against you, practicing maybe
Mm.
consistently if you want to be a pro. Because if you want to be a pro, you have to be playing at such a high level of consistent like good decision making and just like a high level output, that there's all these little booby traps I feel like you have to kind of circumvent. If you and I have understood for myself as a player, the times when I get the best is when I really am aware of that and I really force and I'm very strict at watching myself, like either with VOD review, and I'm basically just on my own ass all the time about making sure that I'm not making those types of mistakes. And that means that like my normal state, if I'm just playing, I'm just like a casual pleb basically. I can't get good because I'm not like focusing in the right places.
I'm not gonna lie. This is why I could never be a pro. I straight up don't have like the, I don't know if it's discipline or like commitment to just fully be like, yeah, okay, I'm going to send it, drop YouTube, drop everything, and just like try to get like really, really, really good at one game. I don't think I have that in me.
Do you think that could be? Do you think it's part of being in the oceanic region because you have less competition, or it's harder, or
Oh,
harder to compete?
absolutely.
Okay,
Um,
yeah.
I actually did compete before. I qualified for two international lands. I went to one of them and it was 33 hours of travel. And the other one I didn't go to because it was 60 hours of
Oh
travel.
my
And that's
god.
one way. So
Oh
it's like
my god.
you go there, 60 hours. Okay. You're there for 3 days. You come back, 60 hours. And it's awful. I'm not doing it again.
Oh my god. That is just horrendous. Yeah, I think
Yeah.
YouTube sounds pretty good.
Yeah. I don't know. I cannot do it. I don't have that kind of like, I don't know. I don't even know if it would be mental fortitude or just like I'm not insane enough to be like, yeah, okay, I'll take 30 hours on a plane. Yeah, sure.
Yeah, and I mean, you're like, it's gonna be very hard to play well after just that amount of travel. Like, even if you
Yeah.
ignore the jet lag, the travel itself does all kinds of stuff to your body. Like, it's very stressful on your body, The rest is terrible. Yeah, that's not good. Yeah, really dehydrated. Um,
Yeah, it's awful. It's terrible.
oh my god. Just thinking of it traumatizes me. Um, so yeah, okay, well there we go. That answers that question. Because I was going to ask about that because obviously you have the mechanics and obviously it's not just that oh you have the mechanics, but to have those mechanics, you've understood how to effectively train. And if you've effectively trained and succeeded in this realm, there would probably be the case that you would also, if if you wanted to apply it to an esport, that you'd be able to do the same. I would expect. So I mean, a cartoon's doing that right now with Deadlock. I can see he's grinding pretty hard. He's got
True,
3
true.
accounts.
I could see him making it places that in that game for sure.
Yeah.
He's so good. I think for me it does come back to discipline though, because like I said, I don't know if I have the discipline to do it with something that might not be as instantly rewarding and gratifying as like aim training. Because with aim training, I'm like, okay, I have this new idea about how to train. Let's test it out. In like a day, I can see like, okay, my aim feels better in like an aim trainer or in game using this new thing, right? Um, Whereas with games, you might spend ages like theory crafting, making a strat, perfecting the strat with the team. It's like more time intensive to drill and less rewarding while you're drilling it. And it might not even work, you know? Um, and it might not even work, not because the strat is bad, but just because the round didn't go to plan or something went wrong or, um, yeah, it's a lot less instantly rewarding. And I feel like for me, and maybe this is the ADHD talking, but for me, I would really struggle with that. And I wasn't really that engaged with that side of competing, I guess.
Yeah, and it makes sense. It makes sense. I think it's really one of those things where you have to like have that feeling like I want to be the best. That just like lives inside of you, inside of your brain. And
Yeah,
I think if you don't have that feeling, I think it's
I don't.
yeah, yeah, that's not going to work. That is, I think, by the way, I think that is the feeling that that does creep into players' careers once they had it originally, and then they get into their 20s, they've kind of done it all a little bit, and then they're like, okay, well, I kind of did it. Do I want to keep putting effort in to keep doing this
Yeah.
now that I've accomplished it? And I've fallen off. I could come back, but so maybe I should like get a girlfriend or a boyfriend now or something. Like maybe I should like like live a life
Well,
now.
this perception of like being washed, and like, fuck, I'd have to put in so much work to get back to where I was. And like, that's just back to where I was, not even better than I was. And I don't know. It's one of the reasons EliGE is so impressive to me because he has been a top player mechanically his whole career, right? Like,
Yeah.
I don't know. And he's still finding ways to improve upon his practice and innovate and push himself. It's so impressive to me. Anyway, that's unrelated.
Yeah, I love Ali. He is awesome. And it is one of his new teammate now, Carrigan. He's an interesting one as well
Mhm.
because Carrigan was never. I mean, Carrigan has had points in his career where he's been like pretty amazing from an aim point of view, but that was like really in the earlier points of his career. And I think going out of 1.6 and coming into and sourcing coming into the early CS:GO era, in the first couple of years of CS:GO, maybe after like year one or year two, people were starting to say this guy was completely washed, and
Mm.
and I mean he's look at him now, and it's
It feels like he's kind of revitalized himself through specking into like a different part of the skill tree, Like he went from focusing on mechanics to focusing on IGLing and building a team and creating that chemistry that you need to do really well. And I feel like that's really cool how he's been able to stay motivated through switching it up over the course of his career.
yeah, he really has an unshakable vision for what he wants to have accomplished with his life, and he's definitely of all the players I've spoken to, there's not. I don't think I can find another player that's more that I've walked away from like, wow, there's no one more driven than this guy. Like this is the most driven player I've ever met. There's a lot of really driven players,
Am I
but yeah,
misremembering, or did he get like a degree while
yeah,
competing?
he was
That's
doing his
insane.
masters whilst he was with I think the God, what were they? Were they Dignitas still? It was like the pre-Astralis guys. Like it was like Device
Mm,
Pre, Zipex. I think was he playing with Fetish as well? I think so. But yeah, it's like the first like 2016, 2017. I think that time period. Yeah, he was like finishing off his masters, and yeah,
that's actually crazy.
and I did a podcast with him in like a random hotel once in Kiev, and And I asked him, like, what do you want to accomplish in your career? Like, what are you looking to do here? And he's like, okay, well, I want to leave a legacy of being the greatest in-game leader of all time, and the way I want that to be defined is I want to make the most international rosters work. And I mean, if you just look at his career, that's like precisely what
He's
he's
done
done.
it.
Yeah, yeah, he's crazy, very impressive. So yeah, I think if you don't have that intrinsic kind of calling, I suppose, it being in such a competitive space, I think you're just going to get kind of priced out, I think. So it makes sense that you're focusing on the YouTube instead. Um,
Yeah, I don't have that in me. That drive to just like, I don't know, not it's not that I don't want to always be better, but always be like competing and pushing myself and like, it's an on and off thing for me and you can't afford that when like playing at a pro level. So,
yeah, it's very sacrificial. Like really have to give up other things that you probably deeply value to have the time to pursue
mhm.
it. And so it's pretty intense, but you have chosen the YouTube route, and you're doing really, really well, and your videos are amazing. And
Thank you.
I think especially what you do with your storytelling, I think is something that I think really makes the videos stand out. And at the same time, you make really good insights. And so on that note, I think one interesting topic that is always on people's mind, I think, that love FPS games is, what is the optimal fit in terms of the peripherals I use, the sensitivity, the setup. These are always the questions, and obviously, this is how a lot of people make money, is because people want to buy products because they're searching for the next best thing. And we're in this time right now where there's a lot of really optimal choices in terms of the tech. The tech is really good, and so it's not like I feel like we're lacking for options there. But the optimal choice is, I feel like, that intersection of the tech being really good and then your personal preferences. So in theory, like how hard is it to know what your preference is? Why is it that we all struggle to
Um,
figure that out?
well, I think it's just really tough because you don't know you like something till you try it, right? You can theorize for sure, but definitively knowing how something impacts your mechanics, and this is the lens I approach. I've made a lot of videos on the topic. I approach every like peripheral with the perspective of like, how does this impact my aim? And then for the video, I go like, okay, why does it impact it in this way? So in terms of finding what is optimal, after a while, you kind of get a feel for what you like, what you don't. And I want to try and find, sorry, one sec. Yeah, that like intersection of characteristics, I guess, based on like past testing. So like with mice recently, I have tried the HTS Ultra from G-Wolves, and it's been like really, really good. And especially for flicking. My flicks feel like a lot faster on this mouse and not noticeably like less stable than on the OP1. And I want to figure out why. Is the lower weight letting me move the mouse faster, or is it the forward sensor position that lets me displace like I create more crosshair movement per like degree of physical movement? Or could it be like the weight balancing, making it easier to kind of manage my inertia? And then I'm like, okay, let's try this other mouse that has an adjustable sensor position, or let's try this mouse with the same shape that's a little heavier and see how that compares. And that's what it's been like for me. And that's how I make my reviews. I approach it through this process of isolating variables and figuring out why I like what I do. And from there, I can figure out what I think I would like more than I do, like more than what I have currently. Um, but I'm often wrong, and even with the amount of experience I have trying peripherals, I will get things wrong. I will think I want something that I don't, and not know why until I put a lot of time into testing it. So I feel like knowing off of intuition is really hard, but yeah, you can definitely get a feel for what you'll enjoy and what you won't.
It's so weird. It's so weird because I know when you're so it's whenever I was competing, I always had like the rule where I'm like, okay, I'm just gonna just I don't want to change any of my peripherals or sensitivity or like really any of my setup or settings, anything like that, because I just don't want to think. I just don't want to be thinking about it at any point. I
Hmm.
just want to focus on the training. And I still think that's like the best approach, because then when you get to your off season, you do get or like a break or whatever, you do get an opportunity to say, oh, I got like a few weeks where I'm not in competition. Okay, let's try some stuff, and want to make any changes. This is a good time to do it. And and that always worked pretty well for me. And I found that if I didn't do that, I would invariably be in this situation where I would be tempted to maybe change something in the middle of competing, and that just never went well. So with that said, like that protected me a lot back when I was competing from like just habitually changing things. But now I'm not really competing, so I'm just always wanting to change things. And I agree, it's very hard to like figure it out. Do you have any loose and fast rules that or guidelines that you think people should, or
Mm.
questions that you think that could help people to understand how they could make a better choice, even if it's just a slightly better choice than however they're making a choice right now, which might just be, I saw a video and this looks cool.
I think that's totally valid for what it's worth. Just like, I like how this looks, I'm going to try it. But I do think approaching it from how I do it when recommending things actually is like, okay, well, for mice, what are your hand size? Like, what are your hand size measurements? And I'll send you an image that you can like put up on the screen or something, and it'll show you how to measure that in case people don't know. And the other factor is like, what is your grip style and how does that kind of relate? So like an OP1 for my hands is like perfect for claw grip, but if you're trying to fingertip it, it might be a little too kind of big at the back, especially. It could like bump into your fingers sometimes, although that doesn't really happen to me, but I could definitely see it happening if you had, yeah, like my hand size, smaller hands, or a mouse like the XM2. Like for me, unusable in claw, which is my main grip, but if I were to use fingertip grip, it'd be a pretty good fit. And being aware of like roughly what sizes work for you in mice is like kind of just a guideline that I like to follow when trying products. And I typically won't buy things that are like outside of my acceptable range, you know, like the Death out of E3, heard great things about it. It will be too big for me. I don't even need to try it, you know? um, that already cuts off like half of the potential purchases for me. And then the rest of it is just kind of watching reviews, taking note of what they're saying, and like find a reviewer you like tend to agree with or tend to trust their recommendations on, or alternatively one you always disagree with, because I think there's something to be like said about, you know, there's value there too, as long as they're explaining why they disagree with you in this case, whether they like or dislike a product. And yeah, kind of follow their recommendations, try and follow their logic when they're talking about it. Because I think if a reviewer is doing it well, they will have some logic to like, okay, what does this feature do? Why do I like it or why do I don't? You know?
Yeah, that definitely makes sense. I think that's definitely some good advice. And I got to say though, you know, the the difficulties are not limited to just the mice too, which is
Oh,
hard enough.
absolutely.
And so like this is something like one of the things for me. I'm thinking, I'm hoping that for myself, I've simplified it because I really just do love glass, and I've always loved glass, and I've used glass since the ice mat, which came out like 2003 or something. It was like the first glass pad ever. And then
I didn't know that actually. That's so cool. I knew about the ice mat. I didn't know that you used it. That's awesome.
yeah, yeah. It, I'll tell you. So the reason I used it was because back then, it was really popular with quite a few Quake players, but more specifically some of the Swedish players that had like the best mechanics. And so I was like, okay, I'm gonna get this glass pad, and it was the ice mat. Then became, I think they got acquired by Still Series, and then it became what did they call it? They called it something else. I forget. They renamed it as something, so it was no longer the ice mat. But anyway, um, so now you got the sky pad. So it's really cool that because glass pads are picking up. But the point about I'm making about glass is that glass is kind of straightforward, I feel. But there's so many different variations of cloth pads. And even for me with the glass, I'm like, okay, well, okay, how many mouse feet am I using? What type of mouse feet am I using to like control the friction? And then also I'm thinking, well, with glass, I'm gonna I drag or at least I position my knuckles of my like thumb and maybe like my pinky to potentially add extra like drag on the glass so I can stop
Hmm.
the flicks and stuff. So there's all this stuff like going on. So in terms of like mouse pads, do you do you have any guiding principles with mouse pads and how you should figure that out?
Um, it's a really tough because like I think glass is really cool. I also don't think it's a good like general recommendation. I think for most people it won't work great. Quake is definitely one of those games though where I can see it like really excelling, but like in Valorant, in Counter-Strike, it's gonna be really tough to use. And unless you know what you'd want it for and why, like stylistically, I don't think it's too like worth considering. um it depends though. Like it definitely has a place. I just think it's a bit like more widely like it's being used outside of the place that it has sometimes. I know I tried to use it for like target switching because I'm like, oh, a faster pad that'll make me flick more quickly. But I actually found the opposite. I found that I had to go slower to maintain good flicking technique on a faster pad. I couldn't kind of lean into that friction as much, and it, yeah, kind of limited me there. So there are often like odd interactions that you won't intuit. At least I didn't intuit it. Maybe other people do, but yeah.
It
In
is.
terms of guiding,
Oh
sorry,
no,
you go.
I was just gonna say I have also noticed this that like the performance on the glass pad sometimes for me, even though my preference is so strong, I'm often playing games where I know that if I had the right cloth pad, it would help me more, for sure. But my preference is just so strong, and I'm not competing, so I'm not caring about it too much. But sorry, go
I
ahead.
might have a recommendation for you. Remind me after
Oh
this,
yeah, yeah.
I'll recommend you something that I think would be good. Or should I just say it
You can
now?
say no, yeah.
I'll just say it now. The Key 83 from Artisan, new release. If you get it in the mid variant, it is probably the most like glass adjacent cloth pad I have ever used. It has like perfect consistent X and Y axis. It has basically no give from like pressing down on it. It's super compatible with like arm sleeves. It's just really good. It's also pretty quick, so you won't really lose that like no friction feeling. And the other benefits of glass, the consistent surface feel, that's all there too. So it's really good.
Awesome. I will try to get one. That sounds great.
Good luck. I know they're a bit of a pain to get like
Yeah.
outside of Asia Pacific.
Yeah, I need to get someone to hook me up. Um, but yeah, with that said, I know mouse feet was mentioned too. Is there how do should we be obsessing about mouse feet? How important is it?
Obsessing, no, but experimenting, yes, I think. Like they do matter. They can change a lot, and they have for me, but they're definitely not the most important thing. I think it's tough. It's tough because I would have to put them last out of the three big ones: mousepad, mouse skates. But they're among the three big ones, you know. Um, when you think about it, the two things you're moving around are the like mouse skates against the mouse pad. They're half of that glide interaction, so you want them to be at least good. And I think stock skates generally aren't, or at least they're not up to par with aftermarkets. The best skates I've ever used for cloth have been the Ultra Glide Silence, I think they're called. And the best for glass, in my opinion, are the Ultra Glide like RS Ren Sport, I think. I'm not too sure. I can link you both after. They're my two picks. Actually, no, the Artisan dots are my favorite for cloth, but they don't exist yet, so I can't really give like a recommendation.
Nice.
And those ones actually did convince me that skates do matter. Like they changed a lot about a lot of mouse pads and kind of fixed a lot of really bad pads for me. Like I'd go back to try a pad for a video that I thought was really terrible and be like, wow, it's actually not as bad as I remember. And then try it with normal skates and it's like it's every bit as bad as I remember. The Artisan dots have just like fixed it because of how they changed how the like static and dynamic friction interact with each other. So yeah, they can change a lot. Most of the time they don't. But if you find the right skates, like it's a pretty significant thing. At the same time though, it's something that I've never had to really think about. It's like I try them, okay, I like these, I don't like these. It's never something I've deliberated on for days, swap back and forth. It was a pretty simple decision. So yeah, that's been my experience with skates.
All right. Well, that's really helpful, and I think that the next logical place to move is to talk about the sensitivity because you
Hmm.
basically use all of them. So I don't know if I don't know, how people should interpret that, but obviously, yeah, you use a lot of different sensitivities. Um, would
Hmm.
you say a reason? Okay, so let's. I want to look at this from the perspective of the average person because I think the average player is not looking to be super good with every single sensitivity, but they might want to understand how a sensitivity may be correct for them based on what they're playing or what they're doing. Um, and sensitivity changes can be helpful for training too. So what are
Mhm.
your thoughts on sensitivity when people kind of approach you with this question?
I have a whole video on this. I think I break it down pretty well there. It's a little old now, I think. Um, the insides are still solid though. It is tough though, because I know that personally, changing my sense a reasonable amount, but not too much, has not been bad for my performance and has helped me a lot. But I do know, like, I've coached people who just like, they will constantly be like mid official game thinking like, oh shit, is my sense wrong? Am I on the wrong sense? Should I lower it? Should I raise it? That's not helpful or useful for training at all. Um, and I don't really ever change my sense in a given game, like maybe Counter Strike sometimes, but for Battlefield, COD finals, I kind of just like open them and whatever I had it set to last, I'll just use. I don't really think about it that much in game, but like I think the most recent example of me doing this very mindfully is like I had an issue where I would really struggle to be continuous between, like, I'd make an adjustment with my wrist and have to track through with my arm very harshly. And I'd really struggle with that. I'd struggle to move my arm at the speed and like kind of flow between those two movements. So I played Smoothbot at like 70 cm or something. That's usually dumb because that, like, Smoothbot Season 3 moves pretty quick. But by doing that, it forced me to kind of isolate that muscle group. And that is kind of the benefit I think changing sense can have. It will force you to do more with different groups. Like playing really high sense can isolate your wrist and fingertips, playing really low sense can isolate your arm. And it's useful because no matter what sense you're playing at, you're going to be using a little bit of everything typically. So you really want to be able to be comfortable with all of them, you know? And I think if you only ever train, and I think if you only ever train at like super low sense or super high sense, you'll kind of miss out on, yeah, developing those other muscle groups. And I think it's visible in a lot of like people's gameplay who have only ever played super low or super high. There's a pretty big like weakness visible.
Yeah, I know that I've definitely suffered from that as someone that played with fast sensitivities a lot, where I would have to try to really. Oh, so
You played really quick, didn't you? Like 20 something, 22, 24?
yeah, 20 is what I'm playing on right now, 2021. Yeah, and I was playing around 25, and I thought that was because like, so 20 to 25 has been sort of my general range, I'd say, in
Mm-hmm.
my sort of competitive career, and I definitely noticed that especially noticed with certain mice or certain pads or certain games where suddenly I would have to do, let's say, like big movements, and then that would position
Mm.
my hand in such a way that okay, now my wrist is like extended too much, and I'm not able to aim from a neutral position, and so it's kind of awkward and feels clunky. Or like tracking, like certain tracking would be like really really hard, whereas my tracking
Mm-hmm.
like in other scenarios was really really good. And so yeah, I noticed all these weaknesses, but because when I was competing, it was in Quake, and in Quake, like I didn't have any problems with what I was doing because I was so trained and I knew all the movements, and so it never really created any issues. But as soon as I started playing other games where I had to use, let's say, Overwatch, and like suddenly I'm trying to do vertical tracking, and like, oh, my tracking is really good, but then I'm trying to track something that moves unpredictably in the air, like Mercy, like jumping around,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
I'm like, whoa, I can't actually do anything. And this I have no smoothness. I can't like react to this. And so I started to realize that I had problems. And then when I was doing some coaching with Minnie a long, long time ago. He was like, okay, we're going to get you on a slower sensitivity so that you can learn some arm control. And then as soon as I started to generate some arm control, I was like, oh, this is really interesting because there's a lot of movements where I can just use my arm to just position myself. And then I have this
Mm-hmm.
spot where my strength is my fingertip aim and my wrist aim. And so now my fingertips and wrists are always able to be in a position of advantage no matter what's going on. And then I can do
Yeah, you can still kind of
tracking.
pivot from that comfortable point, right? Like you're never kind of forcing yourself to kind of reach the edge of your range of motion and then go further with the same muscle group because you can always swap and then swap back.
Yeah.
I found anyway.
Yeah, you're totally right, and it's really interesting because if I this just makes intuitive sense too, but I just never really thought about it. that yeah, if you're in this position where you're having to like go to the edge of a range, you're going to have less control at the extremities of that range than if let's say in this instance where my arm can help do like most of the work. Now I'm keeping myself with my fingertip or my wrist in a point of generally where I'm in my like 50% of that range where I have the most control.
Mhm.
So now I'm going to be a lot more consistent. So that when I started to like experience that, I was like, oh my god, this is I feel stupid. And it's funny because I used to study. I like studied a lot of like mouse cam VODs, and one of the people that I studied
Mhm.
very early on was Shroud, because he had such like visibly good mechanics, and always looked like he was in control. Would be one way I would describe it. And then I remember like breaking down this one CS deathmatch video he had from his stream, like very old footage, and I was noticing how yeah, depending on what he's doing, he's using his arm or his wrist or his fingertips, like he's using kind of everything. But he did it just intuitively. He just knew, he just knew how to aim like that. So just very good intuitive sense of how to do it. So, but the funny thing is that Shroud's aim is no longer impressive these days because so many people have like caught up now with the theory. Um, like your aim is like way better than Shroud's, for example, which is
Thank you.
which is like which is crazy to say in a way because for so long Shroud a pro player, but also known to be one of the best aimers or have some of the best mechanical aim in the world. And in his
I mean,
early
that's what it
years.
was for me, right? Like just the peak of mechanical skill when I was first getting into it. I actually think his aim is still pretty impressive considering, how little he, I don't know, I don't want to say cares about it, but he definitely hasn't put as much thought about it into it as I have, And he's still like really, really good.
Yeah, yeah, you're right.
I
And
think his adaptability is really impressive too.
yes, that is a really, really good point. That's a really good point. That I feel like that's one of his great talents with it as for sure. Because that was the thing I noticed. Like I mean,
Mhm.
when I went from Quake in the old days, when I was at my peaks in Quake and I go to CS, it would feel really easy to aim. But that was also because like Quake was a much more aim intensive game. So I was probably getting way more training for my hours put in than anyone was getting on return from putting hours into CS. So
He was like going the other way though, starting from Counter-Strike and like moving out.
oh for you. Yeah. But like, did you find that to be
Oh,
like more
for
difficult?
Shroud.
Oh, for
For
Shroud, for Shroud.
Shroud.
Right, yeah,
Mhm.
and that's a great point too because in Counter Strike you have to like counter strafe and just like the way that your movement is sort of connected to your aiming is like very specific. And in Quake it's a lot easier. I feel like going from a game like an arcade game like Overwatch or Quake to then learning that I have to stop to shoot. At least I found that. I don't know if you found it easier one way or the
Interesting.
other way.
I found it a bit weird to not Counter-Strike. I started with Counter-Strike and later swapped to I I don't know if I'd say I competed, but I took PUBG seriously. I wanted to get really good at it, which is funny because that game was like a joke to a lot of people, but it had a pretty active competitive scene.
Yeah, yeah.
And I was counter-strafing a lot of my shots early on in that game just because of how inbuilt that movement was, And it's not productive. You shouldn't be doing it in a lot of games. But yeah, it was hard to kind of work myself out of that habit, I guess, and become more dynamic with my movement in a sense like, okay, I'm playing Apex, I'm going to do some more intricate dodge pattern, or I'm playing Counter-Strike, I'm going to, peek properly with tight strafes around corners and counter-strafe my shots with correct timings. That took a while to kind of become intuitive when swapping between games, but Shroud has like no issue with it, so I don't know.
Do you
I still find that very impressive.
do you have any games right now that kind of excite you from an aiming point of view, or do you feel like there's nothing out there right now that really that feels really good?
It's a little slow. Like it's all a bit dull. I think Frag Punk is really cool. It takes like the mechanics of Counter Strike with like tough recoil patterns and not so much the shooting actually. The shooting's a bit more Call of Duty like, but it takes the Counter Strike recoil, combines it with um, Call of Duty shooting mechanics, adds some more like air movement and stuff, at least with the bounce pads and whatnot and the zip lines, and then makes the time to kill higher. So you have to control for the recoil while hitting like 2 bullets in the head to kill. And I think that's really cool. I also think the competitive mode of that game is a little bit boring. So I hope the game modes end up being better, but that has potential. And then the other one is like the finals, I think is really cool mechanically. But that's about it, honestly.
What in terms of we mentioned Shroud, but are there any other players that have served as inspirations for you, or you just like really enjoyed watching whilst you were kind of coming up?
Do you remember WAF from Counter-Strike? Not like a competitive player, just like a fragger.
I don't
Um,
think so.
Very, very flicky, a lot of time in aimbots, really sharp, and genuinely blew my mind the first time I saw their gameplay. Like, genuinely looked inhuman to me. And that was a big motivator that got me into like aim training conceptually, I suppose. Like, I'm not going to just play the game, I'm going to sit down and I'm going to shoot a bunch of targets that, aren't humans to get better. And that's how that concept was kind of introduced to me. Um, I want to name Scrubwell as well for being the first person I saw who really took that kind of multi-game mechanical excellence and like mastered it. He was really good at like everything. And I found that really impressive as well.
Do do you in terms of like Quake and stuff, are there players or like what's your feeling with like Quake as a game that has a pretty aim intensive style? Because obviously, I guess Overwatch is something we can talk about too, but but Quake used to be sort of considered before Overwatch came along. It's like, okay, this is the peak of like aim mechanics and so on and so forth. And I think that's like maybe a little bit of a rudimentary way to think about it, but it definitely it was very intensive, very fast. The dodging is very like high level and so
Yeah.
on.
I think dodging is the biggest thing. That and Apex are kind of the only games that still stress that skill. It's kind of like a lost art almost in FPS mechanics. But I do think in the aiming community, people kind of, they say like Quake is all aim, it's pure mechanics. I don't think that's true. I think there's a lot more that goes into it. But I do think it has some of the widest, like, it has a pretty, like, substantial potential for like skill expression, which a lot of games are missing now. There are a lot of different ways you can play Quake, a lot of different styles you can kind of excel in within the game. That you're not really given that freedom, at least not to swap between them dynamically, which Quake also lets you do as well, using different weapons, using different aiming styles within the same life. Whereas like on Overwatch, you'd have to like, okay, I'm playing Soldier this life and I want to play something a bit more precise and a bit more dynamic. I'm going to swap over to Widow and then Projectile. You have to swap again. And in Quake, you can do it all at once, basically. And I think that's really cool. And I think that's where it has the edge, but I don't think it's just like pure aim game like a lot of people in aim trainer spaces seem to think.
Yeah.
Like, I don't think I would be a good Quake competitor, even though I'm like good at shooting people.
It's definitely interesting based on which Quake you play too, because
Mm.
there is CPM challenge pro mode which has like instant weapons swap. Like it has a much more complicated like movement system than sort of like what you would see in just like base Quake Live, and that was considered to be like just aim and movement maxing, and you could get away with being unbelievably skilled mechanically, more
I
so,
actually really
and
enjoyed that one.
and
That was my favorite.
it's so fun. It's so fun because the movement is like so crazy awesome, and there's still lots of mechanics in there that don't exist in anything else. And then also, yeah, like LG into rail combos and just like flying around the
Mhm.
map at fast speeds as is your opponent, and like just crazy flicks all over the place and awesome tracking, just lots of vertical aiming and just this I don't know, CPM was awesome, and especially like playing like team deathmatch and stuff, or the CTF was also very fun in CPM because of how free the movement was. That is like for me was the peak of mechanics for both movement and also aim. Because like you say as well, like you're not restricted to a role as well. You can kind of do everything. So I hope that something like that comes back at some point. I don't know. I feel like us enthusiasts have been saying that for a long time, and I don't know. I don't know what the problem is exactly. I don't know if you have a good sense. What's your sense on this question? Like, why are we
I
sort of
think,
missing a deathmatch game like that?
well, you mentioned earlier, like, games are kind of designed to be dopamine drip feeders, and you can't get dopamine if you're getting like destroyed by people who have been playing the same game for 20 years. And like, there are a lot of people who've been playing Quake longer than I have been alive. I would have to put in a lot of work to get good at that game. And I think if it was alive in my region, maybe I would put the work in. But as of right now, it just doesn't seem worth it to me. And that's someone who is really dedicated to, mechanics, and I like expressing them in interesting ways. And that game offers me all the tools I would need to do that, but it still doesn't seem worth it. And when you look at it then from the perspective of the average player who just wants to play a game for fun with friends, I don't think there's that push, that motivation that you kind of need. I don't know.
Yeah, I totally get it. It's just, I'm just gonna wait. I'm just gonna keep waiting. Like I'm waiting for the dragons to reappear in like Game of Thrones. Like it's like for everyone now, that because it's kind of like similar in a way, because I'm like, oh, I used to be alive in a time when there were dragons and stuff, but for most people it's like there's just myth and lore, because like people don't know what Quake is anymore, but it's like the grandfather of FPS. It's like a Quake 1, the first true 3D engine, and that engine still has code that's in Counter-Strike now today, CS2. Like it still has code from that original
And
id Tech
Call
1
of Duty
engine.
games as well.
Yeah, man, maybe one of these days. Okay.
No, I agree. I think the closest we've gotten recently has been like the finals and Apex Legends. Apex Legends has like, it's so expressive in terms of mechanics, but has been kind of ruined by other factors I don't think are that applicable. Things
The
like
crossplay and
how,
stuff, or
yeah, aim assist interacts, and also like the fact that abilities are so prevalent now and you don't really ever get the chance to express those mechanics in the way that I think you really should be able to in a game that mechanically intensive. But yeah.
yeah, it is a shame. What do you think is your game of choice, or what should be what's a good game if you want to do aim training but you don't want to play an aim trainer?
Um, that's tough. Either Overwatch, Finals, or Apex are my picks right now. Finals is really cool for like precise tracking and arc reading, and it has a lot of really dynamic situations that can pop up. But isn't that tough in terms of like reactivity? You don't have to be very quick unless you want to be. Um, Apex is really good, but in a bad state right now. If that game makes a comeback, I think it's awesome, and like genuinely some of the best FPS fundamentals I have ever played with, and how the movement interacts with that is just so cool. Um, and then Overwatch is just like really mechanically demanding in terms of like, those tricky tracking situations you mentioned earlier that really don't appear in any other game. Um, you can have situations that are like the finals precise tracking, but like super reactive, and you have to be snappy and controlled, and it's really intensive. Um, and yeah, I think those are my three picks for those reasons.
Makes sense. Makes sense. I'm that there's a game that I want to make that would hopefully fill the void here a little bit. Maybe that's something I can talk to you about on a different time. But that's
Sure, don't want to leak it on
a
the podcast.
dream to get something going there. But yeah, in terms of what you're working on next with your channel and everything, I guess to sort of begin wrapping up the conversation. What is the goal? You've done a lot of reviews. They're excellent. I hope you keep doing those, and all of the kind of guides videos you've done. I think, yeah, that they're again, what I like about how you package the information is it feels like you're able to kind of strike upon insights with brevity that I think a lot of other reviewers may miss, because you kind of, I feel like, have a good understanding as to how these elements actually interact, in terms of like the peripheral with the in-game interaction and the aim interactions, because you just have such a good depth of knowledge on each area. So that's
Thank you.
awesome. But are you going to keep doing that? Are you gonna explore other things on the channel? What's the vision?
I have no idea. I feel like I'm at a really odd point where I have like an audience that seem to like me for more than just like the topics I choose. Like, it's not just about like, okay, she's good at FPS games, can explain herself well. It's like I can transfer that like style of video to other categories. And yeah, the reviews have really reinforced my confidence in that. And I think because of that, I want to start branching out a little more. I've had a video written about typing actually, and like alternate keyboard layouts for at least a year, and I just haven't had the confidence to make it and post it. So I'm going to make that at some point this year for sure, probably sooner than later, and kind of see how it does, see if there's an audience for it. Um, And, you know, if there isn't, no worries. I enjoy making stuff about FPS, but I really would like to branch out into more general tech stuff as well, or more general gaming stuff. Um, like monitors have been super interesting to me, and I really liked trying out the 480 hertz OLED I made a video about, as well as stuff like NVIDIA Reflex 2, if you've heard of it, is really cool, and I think I am suited to make videos talking about those kind of concepts, because like it is technical, it's very techy, but also relates to in a very also relates to aiming in a very like direct way. And I think I'm in a pretty good spot to like evaluate how impactful and important those things are and explain what they do in a comprehensive way. So anything I think I understand well, I would like to talk about. That's my only guideline.
Awesome.
I don't think I'd talk about something if I don't think I understand it.
Well, that's good to know, because I think that's definitely not a good path to go down. And I mean, I'm curious actually. It just struck me as well. Are you? Because I know you. Well, do you do coaching? Because I know a lot of course, AIM community members of your level of skill do kind of go the coaching route somewhat. And obviously, you're making videos, so you're kind of like coaching people who are kind of watching the channel. But have you ever considered doing that, or working with teams or anything like that to help them out with their mechanics?
Um, I've worked with a couple pros. I'm currently coaching in EliGE, and in the
Oh,
past, I have coached Strafing Flame and Mel from Shopify Rebellion. Um, and Strafing Flame is a really, really good Apex player who is also really in aim training. And it's been fun, but I don't think it's something I could see myself doing alongside like the aim content on YouTube. I don't know. It's kind of like treading on the same ground for me in a way that it becomes a bit monotonous. Whereas like if I'm just doing YouTube, or if I'm even like working on a video about like a peripheral instead of aim, like it's a lot easier to fully commit myself to like, okay, I'm going to do a bit on this video and then I'm going to think about aiming a bit, write about it, get some examples up, instead of just like find all the aim examples, talk about aim, do it again, do it again, do it again.
yeah.
I like to have that variety in my day, and I feel like coaching kind of takes that away from me sometimes. But I do enjoy it. I enjoy the process. I might do it at some point on a more broad scale, but no guarantees from me.
Got it. I honestly I did not know that you were coaching EliGE right now. It's actually so funny because he's hasn't he been coached by also Matty and Minnie at this point? So he's like
Mhm.
he's
Yeah.
like he's like trying to extract the insight from everyone in the aiming community. He's just like person by
Oh, and
person.
it's been tough because he already knows everything. He is so, so knowledgeable. I'm having to like frame by frame so many VODs to actually pick up on anything. Um, yeah, it's been good though.
That is actually amazing. I love EliGE. Like I always tell I think this has been how I've described him for so many years. He will just if if there is an edge that exists, he will crawl over glass to find it and get to it. No matter how like tiny the edge is, it doesn't matter. He will get there. Absolutely incredible. And
No, I agree fully.
and
It's awesome to see.
I also, by the way, I wonder how aware or not he is of how impactful he is in further legitimizing aim training to other professional players, because he is the
I don't
only, or the
know.
at least she's the biggest name I feel like that has publicly spoken about it.
This is Elish.
Yeah, yeah.
I think he's played a pretty massive role, and I think he will continue to play a pretty massive role. I want to probably make a video talking about like coaching him and how I approached it. And I think it was really good for the scene, especially back in like 2022 when he first got into it. And same with Mel, actually, who, yeah, pro Valorant player, really, really good. She has been just like in Voltaic aim training without like us like coaching or anything. She just likes it and thinks it's really helpful. And I feel like as time goes on and as more pros kind of pick up the training tool, pick it up as a hobby, or because they think it'll help them, I feel like we'll see a lot more people kind of realizing like, oh, this is something that like is actually really useful. Kind of like Astralis getting sports psychologists as like hired people for their team, and how that's like not uncommon anymore, and they kind of were the first to do it. So yeah.
Awesome. Well, I guess that should do it for this conversation. As I think we've been going for how long have we been going? Hour and 30 minutes. All right. So that's a good time. I know we could talk forever, most likely. So, and I already find myself, yeah, wanting to ask more questions. So I gotta stop myself here. Uh,
I do want to end on something though,
yes.
if that's okay. I would like to mention a few other creators in the aiming space who I think are doing really good
Oh, yes,
stuff.
please.
So Matty, obviously, I highly recommend his videos. He is super knowledgeable, and if you just want like the best info about aim training, like I can't really justify making a full video about like aim training only with my audience right now. It just isn't worth it for me in terms of the time investment. Matty will just make the videos he wants about aim training only, even if they won't get as many views as he could have, like relating it to a game. He just loves the topic, and I really, really respect that and appreciate it. And I think his videos will have a lot of value if you do really care about the subject. Because of that, I think Minigod's videos are really good. We've mentioned him a few times already. He is like really knowledgeable, talks a lot about like aim and how it relates to Valorant. And I really hope he makes more videos in the future because I really like his stuff. Um, who else? I think Pinguify obviously is a creator I have a lot of respect for and has taught me a lot in terms of like how I approach making videos and the thought process that kind of goes into it, and is also like, you know, really knowledgeable about aiming and has a lot of really good insights through the lens of like maybe a peripheral review or yeah, something along those lines. So I think Pinguify is really good as well. And I want to give a mention to Kia, and we should have like channel showcases of all of these on the screen, but Kia is a smaller creator who has gotten into making videos recently and has really impressed me stylistically. I think they have a very good sense of what makes a video really compelling to watch, and I'm really excited to see where they go in the future. So I think those would be my picks, and I want to give them all a shout out here.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for chatting with me and sharing your insights. And
Yeah, same to
I
you.
can't wait to see what you're cooking on the channel. It's always good. So
Thank you.
I hope everybody who's been watching this as well goes and checks out your stuff if they did not already see what you're up to. So thank you, and yeah, I will leave it here, and I'm sure we'll talk again soon.
Yeah, thank you so much. Lovely chatting to you.